Some wishes carry more weight than you can imagine. What happens when a fleeting moment of anger is enough to unleash an ancient force? Stay with me as the Engel family learns this the hard way, where hope flickers and terror waits in the shadows. The wind howled, a mournful dirge against the eaves of the Engel family home, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within the bones. It was 3 days before Christmas, and a deceptive veneer of festive cheer clung to the house like frost. Inside, the Engel family was a study in barely contained chaos. Tom and Sarah, the parents, moved with the weary grace of those accustomed to a constant undercurrent of familial tension. Their daughter, Beth, a teenager on the cusp of adulthood, radiated a quiet rebellion, her eyes often drifting towards the window as if searching for escape. Max, their son, still held onto the fading embers of childhood belief in Santa Claus, a stark contrast to the cynicism of his older sister. Omi, Tom's mother, a stoic figure with eyes that held the weight of unspoken history, observed the unfolding drama with a knowing silence. Then there was Sarah's side of the family. Linda, Sarah's sister, a whirlwind of forced cheerfulness, arrived with her husband, Howard, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. They were followed by a gaggle of children: Howie Jr., a boy with a penchant for mischief; Stevie, a silent observer; and Jordan, a child who seemed to exist perpetually in a state of bewildered unease. Baby Chrissy gurgled obliviously in her carrier, her innocent presence a poignant counterpoint to the simmering tensions around her. Their bulldog, Rosie, added to the cacophony with her excited barks and clumsy attempts to join the fray. Finally, there was Aunt Dorothy, a woman whose face seemed permanently etched in a scowl, her presence a perpetual source of discomfort. Max, a beacon of childlike faith in the storm of adult dysfunction, still believed in the magic of Christmas. He painstakingly crafted a letter to Santa, pouring his heart into each carefully formed word. He wished for the usual things: peace, joy, and the unbreakable bonds of family. He didn't know that his innocent wish would become a terrifying catalyst. The arrival of Sarah's family brought the tensions to a fever pitch. The house was too small, the personalities too big, and the forced conviviality felt like a taut wire about to snap. The air thrummed with unspoken grievances and resentments. Max, desperate to maintain some semblance of the family's traditions, tried to ignite the Christmas spirit by singing carols, but his efforts were met with sarcasm and eye rolls. The breaking point came when Max's cousins, Howie Jr. and Jordan, discovered his letter to Santa. They seized it with gleeful malice, their cruel laughter echoing through the crowded living room. Each word was mocked, each line twisted and turned into a weapon designed to dismantle Max's last vestige of childhood belief. Max, his cheeks burning with shame and rage, lashed out with a guttural cry. He declared that he hated his family, hated the charade of Christmas, and hated the very idea of the magic he so desperately tried to believe in. His anger was not just about the letter. It was about the years of petty arguments, the subtle betrayals, the lack of genuine connection that had become the hallmark of his family. Tom, his father, attempted to soothe him, gently telling him that even amid the chaos, he should always love his family. His words were like a bomb, but the hurt was too deep, the wounds too raw. Still in the throes of his anger, Max tore the letter into small pieces and hurled them out of the window. The wind snatched them up, carrying them on an unseen path towards an unknown destination. No one knew that this seemingly insignificant act of rage was a catalyst for a terrifying chain of events. As night descended, the weather took a sinister turn. A blizzard, sudden and fierce, slammed into the town, turning the landscape into a swirling vortex of white. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows and shaking the foundations of the house. Power lines snapped, plunging the neighborhood into darkness. The festive lights that had adorned the house moments before were extinguished, replaced by an eerie, unsettling silence. Beth, worried about her boyfriend, decided to brave the storm. Her youthful rebellion and recklessness, combined with her lack of fear, pushed her into the blizzard's path. She left, her footsteps crunching in the newly fallen snow, the door slamming behind her with an ominous thud. It was the last normal sound that would grace the house that night. As Beth moved through the blinding snow, a sense of unease began to creep into her bones. The silence was unnatural, broken only by the wind and the crunch of her boots on the icy ground. She caught a movement in the periphery and turned her head, her breath fogging in the frigid air. There was something large, a shadowy figure in the driving snow. It had horns and moved with an unnerving, unnatural grace. She broke into a run, the fear clawing at her throat, desperate for any kind of shelter. She dove under a parked delivery truck, her heart pounding in her chest, the metallic tang of fear on her tongue. The creature stopped just outside the truck, and she peered through the metal grate as it bent to her eye level. Its face was long with a canine snout and eyes that glowed a molten yellow. It didn't pursue her. Instead, it deposited a small object on the ground, a grotesque jack-in-the-box. The creature straightened, its hooves thudding on the ground, and it vanished back into the storm as quickly as it had appeared. She barely had time to register the horror of the face before the box came to life. Its painted features twisted into a malevolent grin, and a shriek that sent shivers down her spine filled the air as it lunged. She screamed, but no one could hear her over the storm. Hours passed, the silence growing more menacing with each tick of the clock. When Beth didn't return, Tom and Howard, reluctantly putting aside their differences, set out to search for her. They trudged through the swirling snow, their flashlights cutting feeble paths through the impenetrable darkness. What they found was not her boyfriend's house, but a scene of utter devastation. The walls were cracked, the roof was partially collapsed, and the chimney had been ripped open as if by a massive claw. The air hung heavy with a sense of dread, the smell of sulfur and rot mixing with the icy wind. The tracks in the snow were not human. They were large, cloven hoof prints that seemed to disappear into thin air. They sensed a presence moving out of the shadows, something unseen yet monstrous. Tom reacted quickly, pulling Howard back just as something large and unseen sliced through the air where Howard had been standing. They retreated back to the house, their blood running cold with fear, their minds struggling to comprehend the horror they had witnessed. Back at home, they boarded up the windows, their hands shaking with fear and a growing sense of foreboding. Howard, armed with a fireplace poker, stood guard, his eyes darting nervously around the room, his attempts at bravado betraying the terror that gnawed at his insides. As the night wore on, exhaustion eventually claimed him. He slumped into a chair, his grip on the poker loosening, his breathing becoming slow and rhythmic. The house was quiet except for the wind, which seemed to be laughing, building in intensity until it sounded like a mocking cackle. From the fireplace, a long, metallic hook slithered into view with a small, animated gingerbread man attached to its end. The hook dangled enticingly in the air, its lure impossible to resist. Howie Jr., drawn by the promise of sugary delight, reached out and took a bite. In a horrifying spectacle, the hook yanked him upwards, dragging him towards the chimney. Despite the family's desperate attempts to pull him back, he was sucked into the darkness of the chimney, his screams cut short by the sound of crumbling bricks. Omi, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Her voice was low and steady, her words heavy with a grim sense of authority. She explained that what they were facing was not just a storm or some random monster. It was Krampus, a dark entity, a demonic being whose origins stretched back into the mists of ancient folklore. He was a punisher, a bringer of dread, summoned by the loss of the Christmas spirit, feeding off negative emotions and the absence of hope. Her words were met with disbelief and skepticism. She recalled her childhood in war-torn Europe, where hardship had eroded the community's hope, and where she, in a moment of despair, had wished her parents to be taken away. She revealed that when she was a little girl, after many sleepless nights full of fear, one terrible night, she wished for her parents, and everyone else around her, to be taken away. She had summoned Krampus herself, and he took everyone she knew and left behind a bell-shaped ornament bearing his name. Omi's story, initially seen as the ramblings of an old woman, became a terrifying reality when the presents under the tree started to come to life. Toys morphed into grotesque creatures, their cute faces twisted into expressions of pure malevolence. The jack-in-the-box, its painted grin now a horrific leer, lunged at Jordan and swallowed him whole. The gingerbread men, now with sharp, jagged teeth, swarmed the family. Krampus's dark, menacing elves, their faces hidden behind black masks, crashed into the house through the shattered windows. They moved with unnatural speed and agility, their claws like razors, their eyes glowing with an unsettling red light. Chaos erupted. Howard, Dorothy, and little Chrissy were dragged away by the elves, their cries lost in the deafening roar of the storm. Tom, his face grim, took charge. He guided the remaining family members towards an abandoned snowplow on the street, their only hope of escape. Omi, resolute in her purpose, refused to leave. She chose to stay and face Krampus, her eyes meeting the flames of the fireplace as they grew in intensity. The dark form emerged from the roaring flames of the fireplace, a twisted, horned figure holding a burlap sack full of monstrous toys. The battle was horrific. Tom, Sarah, and Linda fought with ferocity, their desire to survive fueling their every move. But they were no match for the malevolent snow monster lurking beneath the snow. It grasped them with icy claws, dragging them beneath the surface. Stevie, their small defender, was captured by the elves, his silent scream lost to the storm. The snowplow was their only means of escape, but with every family member being taken, the snow began to close in, no matter how hard the snowplow was used. Max found himself face to face with Krampus. The demon-like creature towered over him, a dark, menacing entity with glowing yellow eyes. He presented Max with an ornament, a bell-shaped bauble with Krampus's name on it, wrapped in pieces of the torn-up letter Max had thrown away earlier that night. The bauble was a dark metallic color, pulsing faintly with an inner light. Max knew instantly, with a sickening certainty, that he was responsible for the horrors that had befallen his family. His wish, fueled by anger and the loss of his Christmas spirit, had brought this nightmare upon them. Overcome by grief and guilt, Max ran into the blizzard, hoping to find and confront Krampus. He found him at the edge of a gaping, fiery pit, a hellish gateway to the demon's underworld. Max, his voice shaking with terror and remorse, begged Krampus to spare Stevie, offering himself as a sacrifice. His words were a plea for redemption, a desperate attempt to undo the catastrophic consequences of his anger. Krampus's face twisted into a cruel smile, his eyes glowing with a malevolent amusement. He rejected the offer, tossing Stevie into the fiery pit without hesitation. Max, his last shred of hope shattered, broke down and apologized for the loss of his belief. He confessed that even though his faith in the holiday was destroyed, his love for his family remained. His words, spoken with genuine remorse, seemed to soften the demon's countenance for the briefest of moments. Krampus nodded slowly, a flicker of something akin to recognition in his yellow eyes, before he still threw Max into the fiery pit. The ground beneath Max's feet suddenly crumbled as he realized that the demon's acceptance was not forgiveness. He fell into the pit, the heat and smoke swallowing him. It was the ultimate punishment for a lost soul. Then everything went black, a void of nothingness that seemed to stretch into eternity. He woke, gasping for breath, in his own bed. Sunlight streamed in through the window, painting the room in a soft, golden glow. He bolted upright, his heart pounding in his chest, his body slick with sweat. He glanced around the room, his eyes darting nervously from one familiar object to another. It was his room, untouched, undisturbed. He walked downstairs to find his family alive and well, gathered around the Christmas tree. It was as if nothing had happened. They laughed, opened presents, and exchanged warm smiles, their faces free from any memory of the night before. It was Christmas morning, a perfect facade of holiday joy, but Max was different. The nightmare was still fresh in his mind. The terror was a ghost that clung to him. As they opened their gifts, he found a familiar ornament hidden among the packages, a bell-shaped bauble bearing Krampus's name. A single moment of eye contact with his family told the whole story. They all remembered. The camera pulled away from the seemingly normal home and ascended higher to reveal the house was part of a vast, snowy world. The camera continued to pull away, passing countless other small glass spheres. Each of the snow globes was a window into a different world, each one showing another family, each one living out the same cruel lie, each one being monitored from afar. The final shot was of Krampus's lair, a vast, cavernous space where he watched his collection of worlds, his power unchallenged, his reign of terror forever ongoing. He was a collector of shattered hopes, a silent observer of broken faith. His influence stretched far beyond a single house or town, encompassing the very essence of despair and the hollowness of the human heart. He will always be there, waiting for the moment when hope begins to flicker and chaos descends. The true horror was not the Krampus himself, but the realization that evil could be summoned so easily, with a thought, with a moment of anger, and with the loss of faith. The real nightmare was the understanding that they were not safe, that they were being watched, that their false sense of security was as fragile as glass, and that, perhaps, there was no escape.